ॐ सर्वे भवन्तु सुखिनः सर्वे सन्तु निरामयाः सर्वे भद्राणि पश्यन्तु मा कश्चित् दुःखभाग् भवेत्. Most of us growing in India have listened to these Shanti mantra as we have grown up, either daily or when we have visited the temples. There's a reason why I'm starting this presentation today with this Shanti mantra, which I'll come back to the context of this later in the presentation. But for today, the topic that we would like to discuss are the human values in Sanskrit literature. So at the outset, in such as a dissertation, we would like to sort of specify what exactly human values mean in today's world, or is there a temporal or a spatial dimension to such a statement? So values, as Milton Rockich said in his seminal work defining human values, as the standards that are learned, shared, and internalized into an individual's comprehension of the world from society and the institutions that build it. And these are the standards that guide the development of the culture of a community, of a nation. And more importantly, at an individual level, these define a sense of self and the member of a community. So these are the values that these are the attributes that a person or the individual looks up to or aspire to. And so if those are the attributes or the characteristic that the person aspire to, then what are human values? So I would like to share this particular definition, which I found very apt, are the thing that human values are the virtues that guide us to take into the human element into account as we interact with our community at large. And there are a lot of social studies work that has been tried to understand these human values from a modern social science perspective, which I come to quite in a couple of minutes. But I want us to sort of introspect on these values that I sort of on the screen in front of you, right? Like respect, acceptance, consideration for other human beings, appreciation of the differences of those human beings, uh, and how do we listen to them, and how open we are to a differing opinion. But it's not always about just the thinking or the logical part. What's more important is the affection and empathy, the emotional content of our interactions. So these are some of the modern definitions of what a human values are. And along with these modern definitions, we have something what are called as universal human values. Why are these important? Because if a particular value has a very temporal or a spatial context, in the sense that they make sense only in a very specific time context, only in say like 17th century or maybe before common era, then whether we find those values within the literature or not is not very relevant to our today's discussion. What is relevant to us is the continuous spatial dimensions and temporal dimension that these values possess, and in which that is the reason I especially like this Isaiah Berlin's a well-known philosopher and humanist, whose definition of universal values are that a many human beings in the vast majority of places and situations, in the sense that it takes in both the temporal and the spatial dimension into account. And and the universality comes in the fact of commonness, that they hold it in common. It is not specific to a country, it is not specific to a nation, it is not specific to a religion either. And and they want to follow it and they aspire to. And another two important aspects that we want to point out here is explicitly or consciously, but it can also be implicit in the sense expressed in their behavior. So why why am I spending such long time in defining the human values is primarily because the Sanskrit literature is like a vast ocean, And I feel like what Kalidasa says about Udbahuryo Vamanaha, when I try to talk about such a vast oceanic literature which spans centuries and millennia, it becomes very hard to scope that into an capsule of 25 to 30 minutes if we don't define the context of the speech. And so I want to use these definitions of universal human values as a way to define and explicate the specific examples that I want to share with you. And it also so that I could show how these values that we and the Sanskrit literature has imbibed in it and has shared with it, maybe even thousands of years ago, maybe multiple of millennia ago, are still valid in the current modern context. And that's where sort of the context by Kofi Annan, who was the Secretary General at United Nations, who mentions how the universal values such as peace, freedom, social progress, equal rights, and human dignity, how those are the base framework that constitute the universal human rights that every nation currently has signed on to as a part of the UNDR, the Human Declaration Statement, and which we all aspire to. So, again, the universal values are the foundation on which these human rights have themselves been built on. And they are universal because they are shared across both the spatial and the temporal dimension. Some of the social science work that was done in trying to understand these human values are by Schwartz, building on the work that I previously shared about from Roque. So, Schwartz's theory of basic human values, which he did it by interviewing people, surveying people across multiple countries, although it started basically in the Western Hemisphere. It has iterated over multiple sets in six or the seven by the last 2010. The survey includes interacting with people across different continents as well. But even with the basic structure that Schwartz proposed, he looked at the universal human values into four main dimensions. And the dimensions he categorized as are openness to change, self transcendence, conservation, and self enhancement. I want us to focus on these four for a second because I would like to sort of, when I try to talk about the Indic values, how these things match to the values that we have ourselves have grown as a part of our heritage in India, in with Hinduism and with our literature. Before we go into the Indic side, I want to sort of again draw your attention to the 10 categories within these four main dimensions. The openness to change has self-direction, hedonism, and stimulation as the sort of the contributing factors, while self-enhancement is about aspirations and achievements, the sense of power and security, and conservation again comes to tradition and heritage and conformity and the rules, while the self transcendence comes across as abstraction about perseverance into universal understanding of the knowledge. So, if some of these words sound somewhat familiar in the context of Indic philosophy or Indic way of looking, it is not surprising because uh, before we approach the Indics, and I want to just sort of take a small divergence into the concept of humanism because universal human values are the base foundation which sort of push into the philosophy of humanism. And this is where the concrete expression of these human values exist in the modern world. As a philosophy which from Isaiah Berlin onwards to Dawkins and much later, where people try to understand the current modern world in terms of putting the relationships of humans as the center spoke of this wheel. As this one of the as this says, it is about putting human beings and other living things at the center of our moral outlook. And this living things is one of the most crucial way how humanism is distinct from the other philosophies and other religious frameworks that have driven Western civilization until now. And the second part is about seeing the world as a natural place and trying to use rational expectations, rational way of observing to understand the world around us, and allowing these two, the interpersonal relationship of putting human at the center and understanding the place of humans within the larger natural environment and ecosystem, and allowing that understanding to allow humans to flourish across all conditions and nations and societies. That is the philosophy of humanism has been propagated currently. And as I will prove to you how this very modern philosophy, and in some cases which is trying to become a new religion itself of the 21st century, derives its primary value system from the Indian value system, which is primarily our Sanatana Dharma or Hinduism. And with that, let's look at what is our human values that we have sort of learned and imbibed through our smritis, our Upanishads, and our way of living. So here is a couple of verses from Yajnavalkya Smriti. Ahimsa satyam asteyam shaucham indriya nigraha danam damo dayakshanti sarvesham dharma sadhana. Here, Yajnavalkya is talking about, Sage Yajnavalkya is talking about what are the tools that enable dharma. Now, dharma is a very capacious concept. There are no equivalent words in English or in most of the other languages of the world of what exactly dharma means. Dharati iti dharma, something that holds, is the derivation of the word dharma in Sanskrit. But what is that dharma holding? And that is where it becomes much more interesting. It is holding an individual, yes. Is it holding a society? Yes. Is it holding a family? Yes. Is it supporting the entire community and nation? Yes. But it does not just stops there. Dharma is the foundation, the ruta that holds the entire universe together, because it is basically about the relationships that bring the components of the ecosystem, the environment, the humanity of the world together. So some of the attributes and the values that is important as we as Indians, as we as Hindus have looked at is uh, ahimsa, non-violence; satyam, it has to be the truth; asteyam, this is, it's an interesting thing that there is no direct word in Kannada or I mean in Sanskrit about, they used to say asteyam as in stealing. And stealing here is not just about material stealing, it's about the sense of taking somebody else's as yours, in the sense that it is a much more broader concept than a material stealing. It is about the sense of freedom. It is when somebody takes away our will. It is a much more larger concept here. So the to for a dharma to be supported, the components of dharma are ahimsa, non-violence. And again, I'm going to come back to these concepts again and again as we move through the examples in our literature. Right? Truth, and then cleanliness, shaucham, indriya nigraha. This is a very concept that has percolated through the Indian system, through yoga, through other philosophical systems, even the way we approach the divine. Right. So this is the, how do we control our senses? How do we, the concept of both our external senses or our internal chanchala manas, and then danam, charity. Dhamma here again is control, but at an external control of our power. How do we control that? Daya, kindness, karuna. How do we share our view of the world with our fellow human beings? How do we treat them? How do we treat it like the way we treat ourselves or not? So, and then Shanti, it's again about how am I feeling responsible for the world? These are some of the components that Yajnavalkya sage talks about as supporting the dharma as seen by the Indians nearly 2000 years ago. And in another context, in the same Smriti, there is again an iteration of some of these with some other additional things. We have the Satyam, Asteyam, Akrodha, but there now then Akrodha comes, a non anger. And this is where the interesting part about, I want us to reflect back to what Isaiah Berlin had said about expressions which are part of it, and how values are something that we aspire to, the standards at an individual aspire to. So Akrodha, we are all susceptible to anger, but what we aspire to be, to follow the dharma, is to be Akrodha, to control our anger. Hrihi, a sense of responsibility towards our actions. Shaucham, again, cleanliness is there. And Dhihi, Dhir Dhrutir Damaha. Dhihi here is is more like Viveka, the sense of right and wrong, and the ability to think through the problem statements. Because it's not about just education, it is the wisdom that comes through experience, the Anubhava. And Dhruti, the sense of steadfastness, sense of maintaining balance when Vidhi and the world tests us. And again, Dhamma, the sense of control over how we exert power towards our fellow human beings and towards our fellow living things. And then Sanyatendriyata, again, the sense of organs, the control of our senses, the concept of yoga, what we practice, Vidya, education, Dharma Sarvodahata. Again, these are the components which support the maintenance of Dharma. If you can see, these are more of the sort of much more singular components. And what I'm trying to achieve, then as we move to the next step, is how these components map to the universal human values, and how we can find both of these as examples and as how they have been the weft of the Indian literature warp. So when we look at both the universal and Indic human values, you can see a lot of overlaps, right? And I call it some distinctly universal Indic values because our experience of these, the universality has come much later as the globalization has increased, as our value system has spread into the world. But these are the basic value system that has flourished in the land of India through its literature, through its framework, through its spiritual system, through its uh, the entire concept of dharma, ruta, satya. So, like some of if you look at the Universal Declaration of Human Rights (UDHR) and these, some of the examples that we talked about in the sort of the previous slides from extracts from Yajnavalkya Smriti and others, we can look at and say how the equality or the human dignity, samana dharma, the way that we look at other human beings, how do we treat them, the concept of dhamma that comes through, the concept of ahimsa comes through. And again, the equality and human dignity here can be at multiple dimensions. They could be at the individual or the interpersonal dimensions, how as a person, we treat other person. But also there is a component of society and political and state here, in the sense that how does state treat an individual? And this is where the human rights component comes through. And the societal is again how these individual equality the values combine to form society, and how the society treats its individual human members. And then obviously there are the personal conduct, the conduct of an individual given the circumstances. And these are some of the components that we just saw: asteya, satya, karuna. And then you have the human commonality, the what I term as human commonality is, what is this universality of how we treat other human beings? whether we always emphasize on the differences or we emphasize on the harmony of us being together. Again, this relates to again back to what, say, for example, in the human, the declarations said, or more importantly, if you looked at the Schwartz structure about transcendence, about self trans, how we want to go into the universal aspect. So these are the values that other cultures have found it to be important. And then you have non-violence or peace, which is self-explanatory. And then one of the more curious ones is about harmony with nature. And just yesterday, if you guys were listening to news, we, for example, in the Faroes Islands in Denmark, they had this tradition where every year they actually have this uh, their tradition of where they actually sort of cull dolphins and whales as a part of the tradition. So yesterday there was a massacre of nearly 1,400 dolphins within a span of a day. Now that is their the culture and the local culture, and because that is part of that. But does it is it in like harmony with nature as an example? No. Then why do I call it universal? Because this is a universal aspiration. Even the people in Faroe Islands are currently questioning their own tradition and saying, do we really want to go in this path from now on? So the Indic value, the Indic human value of respecting the nature, to be being harmonious with nature, now is slowly moving through the world. And then the scientific thinking or rational approach, how we view the world, whether we view it in a much more superstitious way or in a logical way, whether we are free to express our doubts, question the whether we question the shibboleths that has been given to us or not. And while we do this, I want us to sort of focus a bit on the Indian way or the Indian dharma. So one of the interesting thing about Indian way of life is the concept of Chaturvida Purusharthas. So we consider dharma, artha, kama, moksha as the four goals or stages of a human life. And, or you can also think it as four pillars of a human life, or four concepts that give meaning to a human life: dharma, artha, kama, moksha. Dharma is the foundation, how we exist in this world, how we behave in this world, how we relate to the other people in this world. Artha is how do I realize my own worth in this world. Kama is about desire. How do I find pleasure in this world? And moksha is for us is transcending that. And now if you are hearing these words again, there's the reason I specifically was using these choices. Hold on. I want to sort of go back to one of the previous slide where that I actually shared with you here. Hold on. So if you remember this particular Schwartz model of human values, he talked about the four categories. This was modern construct, and this was the openness to change, the self-transcendence, self-enhancement, and conservation. And you look at how directly it maps to the Chaturvida Purusharthas that our sages, our tradition has asked us to follow for the last 3 millennia. The self-transcendence is directly mapped to the moksha, the concept of we moving beyond the limitations. The openness to change is essentially about kama, the desire, wanting to embrace change, about directions, about hedonism. The self-enhancement is obviously artha, it's about achievement and power. And conservation is about dharma, the foundation, conformity, the tradition, the benevolence, everything, security. So, I mean, this was not what I had planned, but when I was researching and as I learned more, for me it was a very serendipitous realization how well thought out our basic structure for our human life was in India, in ancient India, and how well they encapsulate the modern understanding of these human values. So, with that said, now I actually move to the second part of our dissertation, the Sanskrit Sahitya, the Sanskrit literature. So we can look at our Sanskrit literature in multiple ways. This is the way I want to sort of classify them today for this presentation purposes. One are the Vedic and the Upanishadic, the literature, and then you have the Smrutis, which are derived from the Vedas and the Upanishads. They base their uh, source, their knowledge source from the Vedas and Upanishads, but add to it by the societal knowledge, and typically that includes Ramayana and Mahabharata and the other Puranas, and also some of the like Manu Smrtis and other uh, corresponding books. And then we have the classical Sahitya, as what the books that we normally think of as somebody says Sahitya, the classical Sanskrit works, the Kalidasas, Natakas, or the Kavyas, the Mahakavyas, or the Granthas and the stories, the Panchatantra, and so on. And then you have the Shastriya Granthas. These are the Shastra, the books which are dedicated to a particular topic. For example, Arthashastra. Kautilya's Arthashastra is focused on Rajaniti, about politics, about how to govern a particular state. And then we have the philosophical treatise, the Shankara Bhashyas, and other the books on aesthetics like Dvanya Loka. Now, why I'm making this classification here is, at the outset, I want to specify that while we look for the examples, while we look to find what are the human values that are exemplified by our literature, I want to consciously avoid looking at our Shastras and the books of those sort of narrow scope books, because those books are subject matter books, in the sense they are dedicated to that. It would not be a great insight if we can find like moral precepts from Bhartarati Niti Shataka, because it is meant for that purpose. Although it might reflect the understanding at that time, for me, it more delight is when I can find how our poets have interpret these values as representing something much more as a part of the story, as a part of their literature. And hence, in this presentation today, just because of the time limits, and just because as I have mentioned before, I am like the Udbahu, the dwarf person trying to sort of get those fruits from the tree, the Sanskrit tree, or the one that is trying to cross the vast Sanskrit oceanic ocean in a very small boat. Yes, I come back to Kalidas again and again, because in many sense he captures the essence of our both poetry and the human values as succinctly as possible. So, to reiterate, I'm focusing more on examples of these human values in our Vedic texts, but not on the religious part, but in the text that talks about as a part of literature, and in from our epics and from our classical texts. And I consciously am trying to avoid using subject matter texts or shastras, because they are imperative, and also they don't provide us an insight into why these value system are integral to our being. I see some chats there. Like, give me a second. If there are questions, I want to say this. All right. So yeah, please hold your questions, because I think otherwise Zoom is not so friendly with question and answer, and so we can always come back to these and with the present in the slides later on. So let me start with one of the most core human value, the sense that we want to treat others as us. How do we look at other human beings, other living things, in the sense of equanimity and equality? So one of the first sentences that I'm going to take, one of the Mahavakyas, if you want to say, is from the Chandogya Upanishad. Sarvam Kalvidam Brahma. And again, I'm not going to I'm going to sort of restrict myself to, because of the Samayabhava. to the sort of the introductory statements and focus on those. We can always come back to their detailed treatment later on as and when needed. And some of them are more famous examples. So I want to use that as an indicator rather than as then a complete solution by itself. So, as in like in Chandogya Upanishad, you have the Sarvam Kalvidam Brahma, where at a level it is actually philosophical, but it is also about how we say Namaste, for example. This is one of the things that when I interact with the audience here, and I begin my like session saying the Namaste, or when we do our yoga here, we say Namaste, and people automatically do it without realizing what they are doing. And for me, that is directly related to the Namaste that we say, is directly related to Sarvam Kalvidam Brahma, this Mahavakya, one of the Mahavakyas. Why? Because the way we see it, that or the Ishavasya Sarva Yatkinta Jagatyam Jagat, right? We see the entire universe suffused with the Supreme Being, which means, unlike other frameworks, for us, every component, every being, living or non-living, is represents as that supreme being that we are. So the Brahma here is a concept, the concept of supreme being, but also it means every component of this universe, this cosmic consciousness, is impermeates every component, which means every living being. So when I say Namahate, what I'm trying to say is I am bowing to the divine in you, because we both are part of this divine, and the divine exists in both of us. I can't think of a much capacious and ecumenical statement of equality than these statements. And if this is not a one-off thing in our literature, because if the supreme being exists in both of us, when we meet, in every one of us, there is absolutely no philosophical or spiritual or religious framework where one person is above others. That means everybody has to be equal, because everybody has the same daivitva in them. In other frameworks, like in the Western frameworks and other religious frameworks, they have to import this sense of equality, as if either moving away from their historical social constructs and creating a new, or they have to actually bring it in the sense of as somebody giving it to them. Even like one of the more famous one, the sentence that I like very much, like how Thomas Jefferson talks about life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness, that we consider these rights to be self-evident. For them, it is still a creator that gives them. So there is always this concept of somebody giving them the right to be thought to be of equal. But in our Indic philosophy and in the sense of our literature, the way we see it, there is nobody giving this sense of equality. The equality is inherent in the being itself, because we all are, in one or the other form, we are suffused with the supremeness, the supreme of the Isha. And to make it much more practical, this is how Vyasa's Mahabharata talks about this. Sarvabhutastam atmanam sarvabhutani cha atmani ikshate yoga yuktatma sarvatra samadarshanaha. It's part of Bhagavad Gita. So you can argue that it is sort of going beyond my own remit, and I'm looking at something that is much more philosophical or subject matter. But for me, Bhagavad Gita is essentially Gita first. It's a poem. It's one of the most sublime poetry that exists, as nearly every sentient being who has studied Gita has accepted. Western or Eastern, it does not matter. From Mahatma Gandhi to Max Muller to William Jones to everybody else in the middle, from Walden, Ponce, Thoreau to Emerson, they have all found their source of inspiration not for their religious precepts, but their sense of understanding the world, which is what poems are. As Shelley says, poets are the unacknowledged legislators of the world. So here, the reason I bring these things as Bhagavad Gita as a poem, as a poetry, is because that essentially what it is. It is the way that we look at the world, where the Kavi is looking at the world and reacting to it. I see that it's already getting to be. I'm sort of maybe exceeding the time, so let me speed up the some of these explications. So the Mahabharata in this, in Sankhya Yoga, Krishna says Yoga Yuktatma, the one who is joined, one who is had the yogic way of looking at things. He looks at Sarva Bhutastha Matmanam. He finds every other being in him and Sarva Bhutani cha Atmani, and find oneself in every other human, every other being. And again, here it is not just humans, it's living things, every other living thing, Sarva Bhutani. And then other part of Mahabharata, there's an interesting way this comes, if I remember correctly, in Anushasana Parva. There it's yo dharma dharmantaram bhadate nasa dharmaha. In the sense that if there is any framework, any foundation, any set of rules, value system, which actually hurts another value system to coexist, then this value system is not a dharma. What more modern way of looking at plurality and coexistence that we can find anywhere else in the world? If this is not a universal human value where we want plurality and coexistence, respect for the differences, I can't find a better statement where it says, Yo dharma dharmantaram bhadate nasa dharma. So, yeah, and it's an open statement. It is completely open in the sense there is no restrictions to it. That sense of broad vision is what our heritage is. And so as we move on to it, in the beginning, as I mentioned, I started with Sarve Bhavantu Sukhinaha, which we all are as comfortable with, and which are all accustomed to. Again, the key here is about it is about the entire universe. Sarve Bhavantu Sukhinaha. We are not even this is we are talking to the divine. We are asking for the happiness of the entire world, and their disease freeness, or how they can actually acquire goodness and that sadness move away for the entire world. So this is an integral part of our daily existence, where we do not differentiate between us or others. So when I talked about equality and human dignity as the quality, I mentioned one of the important concept here is that an interpersonal or a relationship, or a personal relationship, and a relationship between the state and the individual, where the rights come in, the human rights, all the all the human rights. Okay, give me a second. I'm having technical problems. Uh, can you hear me?
Yes, sir, we can hear you.
Okay, yeah. So let me change my this thing. I think I'll hold on. Let me cut this off. Okay. So as I was mentioning, and uh, Professor sir, when you if I'm exceeding my time, please feel free to let me know. I mean,
Sir, you have another 3 minutes to conclude, sir.
okay, let me try to speed
Sorry.
up. So in the Raghuvamsha, this is essentially about the relationship within a state and an individual. How a king or a state is responsible for the growth of the individual and allowing for their rights to flourish. Prajanam vinayadhanad rakshanad bharanadapi sapita pitarastasam. Here Kalidasa is talking about Dilipa, how Dilipa was such a king that he actually was the father for the entire state, allowing the people to grow, to learn, to to educate themselves by protecting them and filling them and allowing them to flourish, such that their actual parents were just were janma hetava, they were nimitta matra, they just were giving birth, but later on Dilipa took over. So this is as good a definition of a welfare state that we try to build currently than anything else. So let me go to the next one. I'm going to speed up a bit, I think. So the next is the personal conduct, and this is one of my most favorite stories in Brihadaranyaka Upanishad. What the thunder said. Tade tatratvam shikshe tadvam danam dayamiti. Prajapati had asuras, devas, and manushyas, manavas, as part of his shishyagana. And after their brahmacharya, they were asked, "So, do you have anything else to say?" And Prajapati gave them the as the one word answer. And each of the students interpreted it in their own way. The asuras who had lots of power, who had low, but who, so that the means dhamma, that they need to control their power. Manushas who actually were very worried about their greed, their covetous nature, they thought, okay, that means I need to have dana. So here the devas knew their power, they controlled their dhamma, the power. Then the humans who were greedy and who were focused on the desires focused the as dana. So in the sense that I need to share my riches, that I need not to be, I should not be coveting others. Ma kashchid, the like my kasyasidhanam, ma gurda kasyasidhanam. And then kindness, daya, which is what the asuras thought. We have to be kind to others. For me, the reason this story appeals to me a lot, and it has again had has implications like people across the universality of it. For example, T.S. Eliot's Wasteland ends with this exactly the statement what the thunder said about Dhamma, Damyata, and Dana, and he brings out the universality of these things. So there's a lot of influence of this thought into modern literature and world literature. But for me, it also represents our own view of the personal conduct, which is more important. Because as Shankaracharya says in his Bhashya, these three, the Asura and Sura and Manava, that's the three aspects of our own human being. And so these are the three conduct that we aspire to. And then the other one, which I personally enjoy, like one of my most favorite aspect of our Kavi is Valmiki Ramayana's the Mula Shloka, as it's called. Manishada Pratishtam Tomagama Shashwati Samaha Yat Kroncha Mithunadekam Avadhi Kamamohitam. It probably is the only literature in the entire world where a poem, the Adi Kavya, the first initial poem, started because of shoka, sadness, feeling for an other living thing, rather than as an exalt heraldry like in Greek poetry or Roman or as in Gilgamesh or any of those things. And that for me is sort of the crux of Indian literature, some Sanskrit literature. That shloka comes from shoka, from sadness. As later on Wordsworth and Shelley and Keats in romantic poets understand the most beautiful poems are of the saddest thoughts. Here, Adikavi was always there understanding how Karuna, the kindness, is the key to represent the feeling. For him, that I mean, it's a very famous. I mean, I'm not going to explain how this is about stopping a hunter because I mean, saying that he'll never get Sadgati in the sense he'll never be famous or anything. People will curse him because he killed one of the Krauncha couples because and that because he felt sad. So for us, that sense of karune, the sense of feeling daya towards other living things, was the framework which our tradition, our sort of the touchstone of our human values. And then I with sort of other examples, for example, in Vyasa Mahabharata. So this is more of like the personal conduct of a person in the sense, here the Vyasa he says is you need to be responsible when you know the truth, and especially in the current world where media and when you are the fake news and everything else comes, and when good people don't stand up, when good people are slandered, this exactly talks about the personal conduct, that one who knows the right things, if they don't speak up, then they are as guilty as the person who is actually committing the mistake. And then there is this beautiful Kshemendra's Chaturvarga Sangrahas, one of the extra from there, about how Lakshmir Dana Phala, Shrutan Shamphala, Shilam Paran. Okay, how am I doing time? Okay, yeah, I'm gonna sort of go forward. So again, here it's about how these are the conduct, what leads to another, how wealth comes and what leads to that dana phala lakshmi, like the wealth is actually related to charity, and the education is related to this, and so on. So let me just sort of move slightly more into the human commonality part. Again, sangachadvam samvadadvam sammo manamsi janata. It is how from the Rigveda, this is where we say how we work together, work together, we think of each other together. In fact, this particular line has been used by in fact, our foreign ministers and our secretaries when they have talked to other countries currently. That this is our motto, this is our tradition, right? And this is where eventually we come to the things like the statement from Mahopanishad, or even Hitopadesha. Ayam nija paro veti ganana laguchetasa udara charitananstu vasudhaiva kutumbakam. The entire world is our family. Each are part of it. So this human commonality is integral to our, that value system is integral to our literature. It suffuses not just in Upanishad. Ano Bhadra Kruto Vayanta Vishwata. We don't distinguish where good thoughts come from. We ask it to come from everywhere. Krunvanto Vishwamaryam. We don't distinguish between this is better, that is better. We want to make everyone better. Here, Vishwamaryam, here is Arya is being honorable, respectful, better at what they are, civilized. So we want the entire world to rise up. And again, of course, the Shanti Mantra, Sahana, where we do together everything. So this concept of human commonality again pervades every level of our Sanskrit literature. And I'm going to end with a couple of the two of these. So bear with me. The sense of harmony with nature. And I was so happy when we started with the prayer, Shanno Sham Chatushpade, Shanno Astu Dupade. How we want peace and goodness for from the two foot people, that is us, and also Chatushpada, the animals. And then obviously Dev Shanti, Antariksham Shanti, Prithvi Shanti, Apash Shanti, Oshadaya Shanti, Vanaspataya Shanti, Vishwe Deva Shanti, Brahma Shanti, Sarvam Shanti, Shanti Reva Shanti, Sama Shanti Re, Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Again, these Vedic Shanti mantras are is in we talk about the entire nature being harmony with the nature here. It is not just human beings, it is not just living things, it is everything. It is the antariksha, the world that surrounds us, the dyav, and the prithvi, the entire earth. We want everything to be in harmony, everything to be peaceful. Or like for example, madhuvata rutayate, which we most of us we say during our daily ablutions, or when we do puja. Madhuvata arutayate madhukshana sindhava. Let the breeze be pleasant. But is it really the pleasant? What kind of breeze is pleasant? Something which is clean, something which is harmonious to us. Same thing with Sindhava, the rivers. Let them be clean, let them be glorious, let them soothe me. I mean, our even the religious literature here is integral to saying that we look at the world together. For us, everything needs to be good, clean, that and that responsibility is with us. And that is the mutual give and take that is integral as we come and more into the current climate crisis, or as we leave our climate, our environment to our next generation. This is the value system that we need to maintain, and this is the value system that our literature provides us. Again, ahimsa paramo dharma from manusmriti. Again, I don't have to explain it more. And finally, I want to end this as an example of rationality in us. And right from I go back to again to the Nasadiya Sukta, famous Nasadiya Sukta. I don't know of any other literature or any other religious scriptures or anywhere which accepts this unabashed questioning, this sense of wonder, this sense of questioning the base as we have done here. Na sadasi no sadasi tadani nasi drajo no vyoma paroyat kimavariya kuha kasya sharmannava kimasit gahanam gabhiram. This is, in some sense, the fundamental question and the cosmic question, but it also about the question that we ask ourselves, of our community, of our nation, ourselves. See, this is an unabashed, fearless questioning of what came first. Was there even truth in the beginning or not? This is essentially where physics is made of. This kind of questioning is what rationality essentially is. This sense of fearlessness in asking the question. But what is more beautiful to me than that these sukta, somebody that asked, the sage asked this, is that it has been preserved as part of the same corpus of spiritual thinking that include suktas on individual deities, in the sense that we were so ecumenical that we understood that there is a different ways, a multiple plural ways of looking at the world, that we accepted them all without any sense of heresy, or like, in fact, Hinduism or in Sanskrit, there is no concept of heresy, for example, which is prevalent in other value systems. And that is because of this sense of rationality, this sense of allowing for open questioning of the basic ideas and foundations that build a community, because we understand that questioning is integral to the way we build our and the way we refine our understanding. So with that, I would like to sort of wrap up my presentation today here, my speech. I know I sort of ran over a bit more than we had planned, and so I ask for forgiveness. But again and again, thank the Seshadripuram Education Trust, the principal, and everyone else, and the audience who have come here. I mean, like, it's evening in India, and I'm not sure how many from the Western Hemisphere are there. It's quite early here, it's still dark. But whoever is here, thanks for listening to me, and we can continue the conversation later. And I don't want to take more of time out with my next speaker. Thank you.
सर्वेभ्यः आदरपूर्वकप्रणामाः शुभदिनं च अस्माकं प्रार्थना सदैव सर्वे जनाः सुखिनो भवन्तु इति किन्तु अद्यतने जगति सर्वत्र संक्षोभः कारणं मानवमौल्यानाम् अभावः अस्मिन् सन्दर्भे संस्कृतभारती USA तथा शेषाद्रिपुरं सन्ध्या महाविद्यालयस्य सुरभि संस्कृतवेदिकया संस्कृतसाहित्ये मानवमौल्यानि इति विषयम् अधिकृत्य आयोजित वेबिनार् अमूल्यम्। नियतसमये संक्षिप्तरूपेण यत्किञ्चित् वक्तुं साध्यते तद् वक्ष्यामि। समुद्रपल्वलयोः मध्ये असाम्यम् इव संस्कृतसाहित्यभाण्डागार तथा मम प्रबन्धमध्ये असाम्यम्। कृपया नीरक्षीरन्यायम् अनुसरन्तु। Sorry, I do not have a PPT presentation to make it interesting. I request all of you to listen to me patiently. Sangachadhvam samvadadhvam samvo manamsi janata. Go together, speak together. Let your minds be of one concord. Samano mantraha samitaha samani samanam manaha sahachittamesha. Let their thought be the same, gain be the same, their mind be the same, their heart be united. The Vedic sage stresses on the unity of mind, speech, and action, resulting in a united society leading to immortal happiness. Indian lifestyle has always been special. It is a model for the whole world. Human values have been given the utmost importance. The concept of value can be understood as a generic principle that upholds dharma, the pre-arranged structure of duty and accountability at the individual and societal level, leading to atmakshema and lokakshema. It is a well-known fact that Indian value system as depicted in Sanskrit literature is based on the Purusharthas, as already mentioned by Sri Ganeshji, fourfold objectives, namely dharma, artha, kama, and moksha. Dharma is the basic principle to be followed by the whole world, that which has been upheld by our sages. The specific and general values of dharma are to be understood. Dharma is not an abstract idea. The nature of dharma is given in a nutshell by Manu. Dhritihi, Kshama, Dhamosteyam, Shaucham, Indriya Nigraha, Dhir Vidya, Satyamakrodo, Dashakam, Dharma Lakshanam. In fact, when I was told that both of us had to speak on the same topic, I was a bit apprehensive. So thank God Mr. Ganeshji has referred to the Yajnavalkya Smriti, and I am referring to the Manusmriti. Firmness, tolerance, self-restraint, non-stealing, cleanliness, control of senses, good understanding, high learning, truth, and not having anger. These 10 constitute dharma. This shloka has a deep-rooted meaning. Basic human values for a successful life and a happy society are referred to here. I shall now give references to these values in the Sanskrit works. Dhriti, Dhriti, Dhairya, and Dhirata are generally used in the sense of absence of fear. But Dhriti as a human value has a special meaning. It is referred to as a mental state which helps in keeping the body and senses in a balanced state. Sri Krishna mentions Dhriti as his vibhuti while addressing Arjuna. Shiva allows the most beautiful and attractive Parvati to serve him while practicing penance. There is not even an iota of disturbance in his mind. Kalidasa describes this state in his Kumara Sambhava, Vikara hetau sati vikriyante, yesham na chetamsi ta eva dhiraha. Dhriti thus lays the foundation for a righteous life. Kshama. Kshama is the ability to bear with any insult caused by others without getting upset. If this human value is present in all, it will be like seeing paradise on earth. In the Mahavira Charitam of Bhavabhuti, Rama begs pardon from Parashurama for having forced him to take up weapons. It was an insult to Parashurama, but he replies that Rama had done the right thing. Rama says, Katham naparadham maya yadayudha parigraho yavad arudho duryogaha. Jamadagnya says, Esha eva nyayaha. One has to give up ego to have kshama. An offshoot of kshama is daya. When one is tolerant, compassion is but natural. Mercifulness towards the weak and fragile is personified in Rama as expressed by the great poet Valmiki. Sarveshu sahi dharmatma varnanam kurute dayam chaturnam hi vayasthanam tena te tam anubrataha. Prani daya is mentioned by Kautilya in the Ashwadyaksha Prakarana. He says, aged horses not useful anymore should also get food for maintenance. From daya comes dana. Karna cannot be missed out while talking about charity. The Hitopadesha of Narayana Pandita emphasizes charity by saying, what is the use of wealth when one neither gives it away nor enjoys it? Dhanena kim yona dadati nashnute. Kshama in a person also brings out another human value, namrata. After the Agni Pariksha, all gods assemble and tell Rama that he is the incarnation of Narayana. But Rama, with all his modesty, replies, I am a human being. I am Rama, the eldest son of Dasharatha. Atmanam manusham manye Ramam Dasharatatmajam. The contrary can be seen now. Ahimsa certainly accompanies kshama. Ma himsyat sarvabhutani is a well-known Vedic quote. In the Uttararama Charitam of Bhavabhuti, Chandraketu, on reaching the hermitage of Valmiki, says that none should trespass the precincts of the ashrama. Na kenachit ashramabhyarna bhumaya akramitavya iti. The third human value among the 10 is dhamma. Dhamma has to be taken as the control of the mind, mano nigraha. Without controlling the mind, senses cannot be controlled. It is difficult, of course. When Arjuna says, Chanchalam hi mana Krishna, Sri Krishna advises, Asamshayam mahabaho, mano durnigraham chalam, abhyasena tu kaunteya, vairagyena cha grihyate. The mind is restless, no doubt, and difficult to curb, Arjuna, but it can be brought under control by repeated practice and by the exercise of dispassion. A person who obstructs the sense objects but relishes them mentally is also called a mithyachara. Anyone with Dhamma will be able to follow Dharma, thus protecting Vishwadharma. Stealing, as Mr. Ganeshji said, stealing objects belonging to others unjustly is called steya. Contrary to that is asteya, which is a human value. The Ishavasya Upanishad says, Ma Gridaha Kasyasvit Dhanam. In the Charudattam of Bhasa, the burglar Sajjalaka says that theft was a heinous crime which he did not want to commit the second time. Etavat kimna paryaptam dvitiyam yat karishyami. One should not even mentally decide to steal. Kalidasa in the Raghuvamsha describes the kingdom of Dilipa as Shrutau Taskarata Sthita. Stealing exists only in the Shabdakosha. Asteya not only purifies the individual, but also the society. Next is Shaucha. Shaucha is cleanliness. This includes Antarika and Bahya Shaucha. Keeping the body clean is Bahya Shaucha, while keeping the mind pure from unwanted thoughts is Antarika Shaucha. Manu says, Adhvir Gatrani Shuddhyanti, Manaha Satyena Shuddhyati, Vidya Tapobhyam Bhutatma, Buddhir Jnanena Shuddhyati. The body is purified by water, the mind by truth, the Jivatma by knowledge and penance, and intellect by wisdom. This includes Shaucha in Ahara, Vihara, Vichara, Vyavahara, etc. As we all know, corruption is so very prevalent in every corner of the world. Manu's mention of Artha Shaucha is noteworthy. Sarveshameva Shauchanam Artha Shaucham Param Smritam. Yo Arthe Shuchirhi Sa Shuchihi Na Mridvari Shuchihi Shuchihi. Dhana Shuddhi is supreme. One is pure only when he is clean in the wealth he has earned and not by cleaning oneself with mud and water. Very apt for the present day indeed. The Raghu Kautsa episode described by Kalidasa in the Raghuvamsha after Raghu's Vishwajit Yajna is worthy of mention here. Indriya Nigraha. Indriya Nigraha or control of the senses is another human value essential for the progress of an individual and society. If a person becomes a slave of even one sense organ, he loses the power of discrimination. Downfall is imminent. Indriyanam tu sarvesham yadyekam ksharatindriyam tenasya ksharati prajna dhritehe padadivodakam. It is similar to water flowing out from a bag even with a single hole. Sri Krishna's words have to be quoted here. Dhyayato vishayan pumsaha sangasteshopajayate sangat sanjayate kamaha kamat krodho bijayate krodhat bhavati sammohaha sammoha smritibhramah smritibhramshat buddhinashaha buddhinashat pranashyati. The man dwelling on sense objects develops attachment for them. From attachment springs up desire, and from desire ensues anger. From anger arises delusion. From delusion, confusion of memory. From confusion of memory, loss of reason. And from loss of reason, one goes to complete ruin. Hence, Indriya Nigraha is very important to reach the goal. Next is D. D refers to the good understanding achieved by the study of Shastras. It is Sattvika Jnana. The Taittiriya Upanishad shines with the sermon given to the students at the time of leaving the Gurukula. Yatha te tatra varteran, tatha tatra vartethaha. Act as the elders have acted. Our Maharshis have always acted for the benefit of mankind. To follow them is a safe passage to righteousness. Remember the words of Sri Krishna. Tasmat Shastram Pramanam te Karya Karya Vyavasthito. Shastra is the authority for what is to be done and not to be done. If a person doesn't have the power to discriminate, he is ruined. Buddhinashat pranashyati, as already quoted. The Shanti Parva of Mahabharata gives a generalized truth through Sahadeva that mama, mine, is as good as death, and na mama, not mine, is immortality. Mameti cha bhaven mrityuhu, na mameti cha shashvatam. Satvika jnana is an important human value. Next, vidya is the human value referred to by Manu. We have the Paravidya and Aparavidya. Paravidya is Brahma Vidya, while Aparavidya is Adhyatma Vidya. Paravidya is got by the study of Vedas. It is rightly said, Vedo kilo dharma moolam. Sri Krishna describing his Vibhuti says, Adhyatma Vidya Vidyanam. In general, Adhyatma means spirituality, but anything that is related to oneself, that is one's body, mind, vital energy, is also called Adhyatma. There is no dearth of shlokas to tell us about the practice of knowledge in Sanskrit literature. Yogandharayana, in Pratigna Yogandharayanam of Bhasa, plans the release of the king and talks about action. Sotsahanam nastyasadhyam narana margarabdhaha sarvayatnaha phalanti. Nothing is impossible for the enthusiastic. All efforts started in the right direction are fruitful. Acquiring the right knowledge is a human value to be cultivated by all. Truth, Satyam, as a human value is pictured with utmost importance. It is Paramadharma. The Valmiki Ramayana says, Ahuhu Satyam hi Paramam Dharma Dharma Vido Janaha. Rama is called Satyasandha. Dharmajnascha Kritajnascha Satyavakyo Dhradavrataha. All of us know the saying, Satyameva Jayati. The subtle aspects of truth are dealt with in the Mahabharata, and they are 13 in number. Satyam cha samata chaiva dhamaschaiva na samshayaha amatsaryam kshama chaiva hrihi titiksha anusuyata tyago dhyanam atharyatvam dhritischa satatam daya ahimsa chaiva rajendra satyakaras trayodasha. Equality, control of senses, absence of envy, forgiveness, shyness, forbearance, absence of jealousy, sacrifice, philosophical thoughts, discrimination, determination, always compassionate, and non-violence are all forms of Satya. The greatness of Satya is beautifully described as greater than 1,000 Ashwamedha yagas. Ashwamedha sahasram cha satvam cha tulaya dhritam. Ashwamedha sahasratu satyameva vishishyate. Truth is the best human value anyone should possess. Satyan nasti paro dharmaha. Bhishma here narrates Apadharma to Yudhishthira in the Shanti Parava of Mahabharata. Though truth should be spoken, sometimes it is preferred to speak the untruth. For example, life is at stake and survival is the main motive. Anyo dharma samastasya vishamastasya chaparaha apadastu anrutam shakyaha paripathena veditum. There cannot be one uniform code for all times. Akrodha, absence of anger, is the 10th value or dharma lakshana. Anger is aberration of the mind. An angry person not only hurts others but also destroys himself. Non-fulfillment of desires results in anger, leading to destruction. What greater enemy is needed in the presence of anger? Kim aribihi krodhosti chet dehina. Sri Krishna has described anger as the entry to hell and hence should be given up. Trividam narakasyedam dvaram nashanam atmanaha kama krodhas tata lobaha tasmad etat trayam tyajet. Absence of anger is very important for protection of dharma. There are other references, the same combination in fact. Srimad Bhagavata of Vyasa gives a list of human values. They are Satyam, Shaucham, Daya, Kshantistyāga, Santosha Arjavam, Shamodhamastapaha Samyam, Titikshoparatihi Shrutam, Jnanam, Viraktiraishwaryam, Shauryam Tejo Balam Smritihi, Swatantriyam Kaushalam Kantir Dhairyam Mardhavam Evacha, Pragalbhyam Prashrayaha Sheelam Saha Ojo Balam Bhagaha Gambhiryam, Sthiryam, Astikyam, Kirtir, Mano Anahankritihi. Ete Mahagunaha. Truth, purity, compassion, patience, generosity, contentment, honesty, tranquility, self command, penance, equality, endurance, learning, knowledge, absence of desire, supremacy, valor, brilliance, might, power of memory, freedom, skill, beauty, bravery, gentleness, boldness, politeness, character, strength, vigor, stamina, affluence, depth, firmness, belief in God, fondness of fame, absence of arrogance. These are the great virtues or human values. What more do we want for a perfect personality? Bhartrahari beautifully summarizes all the human values in a shloka in the Niti Shatakam, which reflects the attitude in social life. Trishnam chindi, bhajakshamam, jahimadam, pape ratim ma krithaha. Satyam bruhi anuyahi sadhu padavim, sevasva vidvajjanam. Manyan manaya, vidvishopi anunaya, prakhyapaya prakshayam. Kirtim palaya, dukhite kuru dayam etat satam cheshtitam. Abandon desires. Forgive the faulty. Give up conceit. Dislike crime. Speak the truth. Follow the right path. Serve the learned. Respect the honorable. Be courteous even to enemies. Conceal one's merits. Guard fame and sympathize with the miserable. He also says, Yesham na vidya, na tapo, na dhanam, jnanam, na sheelam, na guno, na dharmaha. Te martyaloke bhuvi bhara bhutaha manushya rupena mrigas charanti. Those who do not have learning, have no austerity, do not give in charity, have neither knowledge nor character, have no good qualities, no righteousness. They on this earth are a burden, are animals moving around in the form of human beings. Thus, Sanskrit literature is replete with reference to human values. The above attempt is only a bird's eye view. To conclude, rights are indeed basic. They must be checked and balanced by values. These are found in the complex tradition as delineated above. Values are guiding principles that should shape our conduct and behavior. Individual uplift comes with the right value, systems that one assimilates within oneself, enabling one to relate with the rest of the world. Atmakshema and Lokakshema, as quoted already. I thank the organizers, especially Professor Satish and Dr. Hegde, for having given me the opportunity to present this paper on humanity, human values in Sanskrit literature, though in a very, very brief way. Thank you all for your patient hearing. I'll end with the words of Valmiki, Ramo Vigrahavan Dharmaha, Dharma Saramidam Jagat, as Vyasa has said, Sarvatra Sanmangalani Bhavantu. Krishnarpanamastu.